What is reality? Let's take an archetypal situation. You are standing on the corner of Fifth Avenue and you take 3 steps out into the street against the traffic light when a bus is speeding along at you at 30 miles an hour. At the last instant you glance up at the bus. Is the bus real? Several voices reply affirmatively. You're damn right it's real. You better believe it. Okay, you look at the bus, and you say to yourself, ah, here comes a bit of reality. Now, do you also say to yourself, here comes a bit of mind? Several people shout no's, but one trainee shouts yes. Yes? Shouts the trainer. You asshole, since when has anyone gotten run over by a piece of mind? He pauses and glares at the offending trainee. Okay, he goes on. Do you say to yourself, here comes spirit? No. Do you say to yourself, oh wow, here comes God at 30 miles an hour? No. That's reality bearing down on you, and those things aren't really what we mean by reality. I mean, what is there about that bus bearing down on us that makes us know it's real? Yes, Helen? We can feel it, says Helen. That's not true, Michael responds. While you're standing there you haven't felt it, and yet that bus is still real. Whether or not you can feel a thing is not a test for reality. How do we know that bus is real? Jorge? It will knock me down. How will it knock you down? Bam boom. I'm down. But what is there about the bus which causes it to knock you down? It's there. I know it's there. But what is there about that bus that lets me know that it's there, that it's real? Bob? It's physical matter. It's physical. The test for reality is physicalness. What is real is physical. All right, Michael is saying an hour later, a light layer of perspiration showing on his forehead beneath his thick dark hair. He has been interacting vigorously with the trainees on the subject of reality and has met resistance from several. Let's see what we've learned so far about the way people talk about reality. First, it's physical. We don't call something real unless it's physical. Physicalness manifests itself in time, distance, and form. Things that are physical have form, they exist in time, and they cover or occupy a distance. We can say that something like the Easter Bunny exists, but it isn't real. An imaginary Easter Bunny has no location or distance and doesn't exist in time. Secondly, the substance of physicalness is measurability. That is to say, time, form, and distance all necessitate the ability to measure, and when something is measurable it simply means it has a beginning, a middle, and an end. Hold your questions for a minute, Richard. Michael interrupts himself to quiet a vigorously raised hand. I want to complete this recapitulation. Okay. Thirdly, the substance of measurability is agreement. For something to be measurable it must have a beginning, and all beginnings follow an end which is preceded by a middle. The exact end of this blackboard here is the beginning of the space between the blackboard and the door at the back of the room, and that space has a middle which is, let's say, where Jason is sitting out there. And that middle may be the beginning of the top of Jason's head, which is also the end of the space between the ceiling and the top of his head, and so on. Everything being a beginning of something, a middle of something and an end. Everything in the universe is in agreement. Its beginnings absolutely depend on the ends of other things and extend into their middles. Everything in the universe flows into everything else. It's all one, beginnings, middles, and ends, all in agreement. This blackboard is real because of its physicalness. It has form, it exists in time, it has location, distance, and it is measurable. It has a beginning, middle, and end. Are you clear on what we've said thus far? Yes, Lester? I still don't see why we have to say reality is physical, Lester says, continuing an objection he has made earlier. As far as I can see, the only thing that exists is mind, is consciousness. Berkeley and Hume said the same thing. How is that blackboard or that bus we were talking about any more real than my experiencing thoughts of Raquel Welch? Well, don't forget your thoughts of Raquel Welch are real, Lester. They have form, they exist in time and have distance. It's only that your thoughts of Raquel don't have the substance that a bus does. You may get physically run over by a bus and you may be physically run by thoughts of Raquel. Then you agree, says Lester, they both exist in my consciousness? No, shouts Michael. Your thoughts of Raquel Welch are real, but there's another reality, namely Raquel herself, and you can be damn sure there's a difference. So too with the real bus and your real thought of a bus. There is no bus except in my consciousness, insists Lester. I know that's your theory. Michael responds sharply. I'm happy you've studied Berkeley and Hume. Your theory is that if I knock you unconscious and lay you down on Fifth Avenue in front of a bus and you get run over, that the bus isn't real because it didn't enter your consciousness. For me, it would never have been real, agrees Lester. I don't give a shit whether you think it's real for you or not. Whether you think something is real or not doesn't have anything at all to do with whether it actually is real. The bus that ran you over would seem very real to your wife and wouldn't seem real to you. But in any case it is real. No. It just means we have different realities. Look, Lester, do you get that for most everyone it makes sense to say that if 20 people go out in front of something that most of us call a bus and all 20 get run over, that maybe, just maybe, it might be convenient to consider that bus real because of its repeatedly demonstrated physicalness? Oh, yeah, I see that. Good. Another example, let's say we create a hologram of a blackboard between these two blackboards, an electronically created image of a blackboard. For everyone entering this room, all three blackboards seem real, but only two of them are physical, measurable, are real blackboards. The middle one turns out to be a real hologram. What's real for a person doesn't necessarily have anything to do with what is, in fact, real. Okay, says Lester, but what about something like the existence of, say, an invasion from Mars? Orson Welles once made a radio program that made a lot of people think we were being invaded from Mars. Their thoughts of an invasion scared them just as much as the invasion might have. For them it was real. No, asshole. Michael shouts, and he comes to the edge of the platform near Lester. Their thoughts are real and they let themselves be run by their thoughts. But when people checked in the streets it was found the invasion was not real. Look, Lester, one of the things you're stuck with is the interim test to reality. While physicalness, measurability, is our ultimate test for what is real, there is an interim test that we often have to apply. In the case of the Orson Welles radio program, the listeners applied the interim test. Anything a radio announcer says is happening must be happening. They couldn't or didn't physically test for the presence of Martians. They accepted the authority of the radio voice. Let's say I announce to all of you that in an hour we're going to have to shift from this hotel to another one 15 blocks away. I then announce that you'll all line up and leave, and to take us the 15 blocks we'll all be boarding elephants that are waiting for us on the street outside. Elephants. Now here in the room you have to use an interim test to determine the reality of the elephants. What is it? What do you use to decide whether there are real elephants waiting for you downstairs? Yes, Bob. It's ridiculous. If I said there were buses waiting? That would be reasonable. I'd probably believe you. So what's the test? Whether what you say makes sense, whether it's reasonable or not. Yes, reasonableness, says Michael. In general we use as an interim test of reality whether it seems reasonable or not. An authority is just one form of reasonableness. Others might be whether we think something is likely or not, or whether a consensus of the people we consult thinks it's reasonable or not, whether it seems natural and proper, whether it's intrinsically believable or not, and so on. Now the next question is, what is the essence of all of these elements of reasonableness? Whether I agree that you're an authority or not, says Barbara. Whether I agree that it's reasonable that it's real. Yes, agreement. We have to agree with the consensus. We have to agree that it's natural for snow to fall in Utah in December, for buses to exist in Tokyo. But remember, our agreement on the interim test doesn't mean that the snow actually fell in Utah or that there are buses in Tokyo. Only physicalness can ultimately verify that. In any case, agreement is thus basic to both physicalness, our primary estimate of what is real, and to reasonableness, our secondary or interim test of what is real. Yes, Brad? But it seems to me. And on it goes about the nature of what is real. We trainees shift in our chairs, get drawn into the discussion for a while and then tune out as the trainer goes back and forth over the points, illustrating them, refuting objections, answering questions, and slowly plowing forward through the argument. Just before an afternoon break, he brings 5 trainees up on the stage, lining up 4 of them facing in the same direction, chests touching backs, with the 5th trainee standing 2 feet behind the other 4. The trainer then abruptly shoves the first person in line, causing the tightly packed 4 to topple backward like a row of dominoes into the arms of the 5th. From the point of view of the 4th person in line, says Michael after the 5 trainees have resumed their seats, why did he fall backwards into the arms of the 5th man? The 3rd man fell backwards into him, suggests a trainee. All right. Good. The The third man causes the effect of his falling backwards into the fifth. He experiences himself as the effect of number 3. What about number 3? How does he view the event? Number 2 did it. Shouts someone. He's the effect of number 2, says someone else. Yes. Number 2's backward motion causes the effect of number 3's falling backwards, which is seen as cause of the effect of number 4's falling. What about number 2? Number 1 is cause, suggests a voice. Good. Number 1 causes the effect of number 2's falling, which is the cause of the effect of number 3's falling, which is the cause of the effect of number 4's falling. But who really did it? You did. Shout several voices in reply. Right. I shoved Ben, which was the cause of the effect Ben's toppling backwards, which effect was the cause of number 2's falling, and so on. Cause effect, cause effect, cause effect, or actually, cause, effect, 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 effect. Very good. But wait a minute. My shoving Ben was the effect of Werner's instructions, right? After a brief silence, several affirmative answers are heard. And Werner's instructions in this process were the effect of his viewing his father shove his mother when he was 4 years old, and his father shoving his mother at that time was the effect of her having just called him lazy, which was the effect of her having overheard her father say that men should always be busy, and her father's saying that men should always be busy was the effect of his father spanking him once when he was. Effect, 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 effect. Michael turns to us at the conclusion of his monotonous recital. In this type of analysis, it's all effect. There never is a cause, and this is the type of analysis you've been using all your lives. It's the one that goes with our reality. After all, it's scientific, right? You experience yourselves as the effect of what someone else does to you, and that someone else experiences himself as the effect of something in his past, which was the effect of someone else, and so on forever. Effect, 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 effect. We have a simple name for this type of superficial casual analysis of effect, effect, effect. We call it false cause, and it's what you've been letting run your lives. After the break, we'll find out who really did it. We are now going to answer the ultimate question, who did it? Says Michael after we have returned from a brief 30-minute break to relieve ourselves, get a drink, and generally unwind. Answering the ultimate question, not bad for $250. And when we've answered it, the truth shall make you free. Most likely the truth shall first make you pissed off, but later, perhaps, you'll experience your freedom. To begin our search for who did it? Or how do we escape the reality of false cause? We must look at what must be the nature of unreality. What is unreality? What is unreality? George? Everything. Laughter. Terence? Imagination. Brad? Thoughts. Fantasy. Beliefs. Concepts. Consciousness. Mind. Feelings. God. Heating bills. Spirit. Illusions. And so on. Okay. Thank you. Before deciding among these, the first thing we can say for sure is that unreality must not be any of the things reality is. If reality is physical, then unreality must be not physical, right? There is no response. Right? Wake up out there. Right? Right. Now shout a dozen voices. If reality is measurable, then unreality is not measurable. Right? Right. Comes the reply from many trainees. If reality is sometimes determined by reasonableness, then unreality cannot be estimated by reasonableness, right? Right. And if reality ultimately depends on agreement, unreality must not depend on agreement, right? Right. Unreality must not be dependent on authority or consensus, or appropriateness or naturalness or any of those parts of reasonableness, right? Right. And if reality is ultimately dependent on concepts, then unreality must not be dependent on concepts. Okay then, let's see what we've got. We've got unreality as something which is not physical, is not measurable, is not determined by reasonableness, authority, or consensus, and is not dependent on agreement or concepts. Can you think of anything that fits this description? Michael steps away from the left blackboard where he has been pointing to the various characteristics he has listed of reality and unreality. He looks over the now silent trainees. What is not physical, not measurable, not reasonable, and not dependent on agreement or concepts? Mind, suggests someone. Consciousness, shouts a trainee from the back. No, says the trainer. You haven't got it. You're giving me concepts. It's not dependent on reason, concepts, or agreement. Thoughts, says a woman in the front row. Imagination, a man calls out. Experience, says someone else. Yes, experience, shouts the trainer. Experience is not physical, can't be measured, is not determined by reasonableness, and doesn't depend on agreement. Unreality is experience. Unreality is experience. Not your feelings, not your thoughts, not your evaluations about it, not your analysis. Your experience. He pauses to let this sink in, looking first at the board, where he has written the word experience on this side of unreality, and then back at the trainees. And wait a minute, we're not finished. If reality is effect, 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 then unreality must be cause, 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 the very source of all things. And of course our experience is the source, as a few of you argued earlier. So what do we have? On our left, reality, which is physical, measurable, and based on agreement and which necessitates a world of effect, 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 and on our right, unreality, which is experience, not physical, not measurable, and not based on agreement, and which we must acknowledge as the source or cause of all things. Again he pauses to look first at the board and then back to the trainees. Anything wrong here? He waits, but for many moments there are no answers. Finally a voice comes from the back row. Yeah, says Mitch. One problem, experience is the most real thing I know. What the hell is it doing over there on the unreal side? The trainer acts almost as if he didn't hear Mitch, simply staring around at the trainees. Yes, he shouts, and wheels back to the blackboard. We have a minor problem. Experience is the most real thing we know. It's the source of everything. It is absolutely basic to everything. It is real. And on the other side we have what most people call reality, which is entirely dependent on agreement, entirely dependent on agreement. If we get enough people to agree that the world is flat, bingo, we got a real flat world. If physicists agree that the atom is the ultimate element of matter, then the atom is the real ultimate element of matter. Of course, when they then agree that the electron is the ultimate element, then reality changes. And of course, later they'll agree that the electron is not the ultimate element. It's a positron, or a piece of antimatter, or something else. It all depends on whether it's a weekday or a weekend. You turkeys. Michael shouts at us. We got ourselves one giant of a minor problem. What everyone calls real is really illusion, is really unreal. And what everyone calls unreality is actually the most real thing we know. The only problem we have up on the board is that what we've labeled reality is actually unreality, and what we labeled unreality is reality. Michael stares out at us for a moment and then goes to the blackboard and draws a thick line through the word reality and prints over it unreality, and draws another line through unreality on the right and prints over it the word reality. When he has finished he bounces back to the front of the platform. But let me warn you right now, he goes on loudly, don't let this get out of this room. Because they'll cancel your vote. I mean you start going around telling people that physicists spend all their time playing with illusions and they'll lock you up. A physicist won't be bothered. He knows that his whole progression is based on this intelligent playing with agreed upon unrealities, but everybody else will cancel your vote. And try telling people that the only real thing is your experience. Lots of luck. No, we'll have to stick to the code words society accepts. When we talk about the unreal physical universe we'll have to call it by its code word, reality. And when we talk about our real experiences of the training we'll have to call it unreality. After all, according to society the real training must be something we can measure, something typed up in this notebook maybe, something we can all agree upon. Michael pauses with a sardonic expression on his face and sits down in one of the upholstered chairs. All right, Henrietta. You mean you're now telling us the physical universe is unreal? What we call the physical universe is entirely based on agreement. An atom, the once basic unit of the physical universe, is simply an agreement among physicists. Nowadays, physicists are agreeing on the existence of more and more particles they haven't seen. Okay, Charlie, one physicist says to another, something must be causing that phenomenon. Let's call it a positron and see what characteristics we can find for it. Righto, Wally, says Charlie. Only I wish just once we could call one of our new particles a charlatron. Sometimes physicists find it convenient to pretend that light is waves. Other times it seems to work to pretend that light is moving particles. They're not interested in what light really is. They know that they can never know what light really is because light can't really be anything except what they experience. In the world of unreality in which they know they operate, light will always be what they choose to agree it is. And nothing more. Yes, Henrietta, the physical universe is unreal, but don't tell anyone that's what you think, 'cause they'll cancel your vote. Light laughter flows across the room as Henrietta stands nervously with the mic. But if we walk out in front of a bus we'll get hit, she says. You said we would. Laughter. Right, Michael responds. No doubt about it, the unreal physical universe is solid, it can kill. Our experience is the ultimate reality, but you better believe that that agreement of a bus coming at you, whatever it is in each person's experience, is certainly solid. A bus is an agreement, it's unreal, and it can kill. Got it? I thought so, says Henrietta, sitting. Laughter. Yes. Elaine? Stand up. It seems to me that this is all very interesting, but I don't see how it answers the question of who did it. You promised us to answer that. Very true, says Michael, moving effortlessly back to the center of the platform behind his small lectern. We still haven't found out who did it. However, it should be a little easier knowing what's real and unreal instead of operating in the world of illusion, in the world of effect. The answer's so simple I'm a little embarrassed to have to suggest it. Experience is real, right? Yes, she replies. Well, who is the source or cause of your experience? Elaine stands erect and dignified but doesn't answer until 10 seconds have elapsed. Well, she begins tentatively. Some of the things in my experience are caused by some things or people and others by other. No, all of your experience has one source and one source only. One source? Asks Elaine uncertainly. One source, the trainer replies mildly, ignoring the dozens of raised hands around the room. Who or what is the source of all your experience? Well, me, answers Elaine softly. Yes, you. Michael shouts. Not your mommy, not your husband, not me, not your Oedipus complex, you. But I'm not the source of everything I experience. When I get hit by a bus, the bus is a partial source of my experience. That bus is an agreement and you have to agree that that hunk of matter is a bus before you can experience getting hit by a bus. But I'll get killed whether I agree that it's a bus or not. You'll get killed all right, but your experience will be determined by what agreements you've entered into about the unreal physical universe we inhabit. You are the source of those agreements and of your subsequent experience. Well, it seems a little abstract, says Elaine as she sits to light applause. Of course it seems abstract. You don't want to admit that you're responsible for your experience because if you did, you'd have to give up all your rackets and games which totally depend on your pretending that other people are to blame for what happens to you. If reality exists only by agreement, then each one of you is responsible for this particular reality. We each create our own experience. You can't name anything for which you yourself are not responsible. Kirsten, take the mic. Kirsten takes the microphone with impatience and speaks rapidly. You seem to be saying that the sharp pains in my hands and shoulder from hereditary arthritis are my fault. We're not talking about blame, we're talking about responsibility. Well, I'm certainly not going to take responsibility for the burning sensations in my hands. My mother has them too. They're hereditary. It's your experience. You're the one who feels this burning pain, right? Yes. She looks directly at the trainer, intently puzzled. And who is the source of this experience of pain? She stares perplexed and does not answer. I am, she says finally, then, checking, you mean me? She points a hand to her chest. You are the source of your arthritis, you are the source of the experience of that burning fire in your left knuckle. Nobody handed it to you. No one else can experience it for you. There isn't anyone else in here or out there who is the source of that burning fire sensation in your left knuckle. Are you listening, Kirsten? You're it. You're responsible. You're the source, the cause of your pain. He turns to the rest of us. Kirsten passes the mic to the robot-like assistant. And that goes for the rest of you arthritics, ulcers, and hypertensives, and the lot of you with colds or headaches or whatever pain or ache you've made. It's all yours. You're the source of your own experience. When you begin to get that and can begin to accept responsibility for every experience you have, then your life will begin to work. You think, he makes quotation marks with his fingers, that you're the way you are because your father or your mother did this or that to you, or your wife or husband or your boss or whoever the hell else you blame for your life not working. But that's being at effect. I got news for you. If your life doesn't work, guess who's doing it to you? Any guesses? He pauses in his walking to look over his shoulder at his victimized audience. That's right, it's you, he adds. Someone raises a hand in the silence. A young man with bushy black hair and thick glasses stands up and accepts the mic. Well, what about God? There is exasperation and anger in his voice. What do you mean? Well, what about God? How the hell did she get in here? What do you know about God? Any of you? Who's God? Don't give me your religious shit. Are you gonna tell me God did it to you? Like hell she did. I mean, the young man goes on, irritated, that it could be our lives are all planned and written out for us and what happens to us in this life is the karma we're working out now from our past lives. There is no accident. It's all preordained. Like a TV dinner, huh? He stands a few feet from the bushy-haired Cliff. Look, Cliff, what do you know about God? I bet you wouldn't recognize God if she stepped on your toes. The only real thing in your life is your experience. Beyond that is either blackness or else the illusory realm of belief and reasonableness. You don't know anything about God. I know God exists. I've felt it. I've experienced it, to use your own words. You have experienced her, huh? Describe the experience of God to us, Cliff. Cliff looks around a minute and then says, You're deliberately trying to provoke me. All right, I'll tell you. I've experienced moments of bliss while meditating and felt a union with the universe. If you haven't felt it, you don't know what I'm talking about. I acknowledge your experience, Cliff. I have no problems with that. What conclusions do you draw from your experience? God exists, Cliff replies. God is all-powerful and all-knowing. Our lives may be preordained. That's wonderful, the trainer says, turning to the other trainees. Do you assholes see what Cliff just did? He took a perfectly valid experience and tacked onto it a perfectly irrelevant belief. I'll tell you what, Cliff, he continues, turning back to Cliff, you keep on believing. You keep right on having your life not work by believing God did it to you. When are you gonna stop laying the blame on God's doorstep? I'm not laying the blame on God's doorstep. All I'm trying to say is that whatever direction our lives take may be already decided whether it's good or bad. I'm not blaming anyone. You're so fucked up you don't see that what you're saying is, if my life doesn't work, it's because it's been predetermined by God not to work. And you throw up your arms, sit back, and complain and bitch and wait for a magical moment of union with the universe so you can forget about what's happening right now. So you can turn off your experience. He walks around on the platform looking at all of us and back at Cliff. That's okay. There are lots of zombies around to keep you company. And I've got another piece of news for you. He threatens us like a teacher, and we wait for the exam to come. Every time you turn off your experience and don't take responsibility for it, you sacrifice your aliveness. You also get a repeat performance. You get stuck repeating your stuff. Cliff, who has sat down, now wants the mic back again and is acknowledged with a nod. I get the impression, he says, that no matter what we say, we can't win in here. He sits down again. That's right. I don't get paid to lose. Let me put it another way for you. No matter what you say right now, I'm gonna win, but you can't lose, in the end. Yes, Kirsten. I think I need a paper bag and some tissues. The assistants quietly hand her what she needs. She sits nervously but does not get sick. All right, says the trainer. Barbara? Well, I'm sorry, says Barbara, a large-boned, attractively dressed woman in her late 20s. I've followed you all this way but I find that idea of total responsibility ridiculous. 2 weeks ago, while I was at my job, my apartment was broken into and I was ripped off of a brand new stereo system, my TV, and some valuable clothes. And I assure you, I didn't cause my apartment to be robbed. You certainly did, says the trainer on his way to the back lectern for a drink from his thermos. But I didn't rob my apartment. Who did? I don't know the thief. says Barbara, standing with one hand on her hip and looking annoyed. What makes you think your apartment was robbed? I came home and my stereo was gone. Maybe I borrowed it. Laughter. My apartment was robbed and I am not responsible. You tell me you experienced that your apartment was robbed and I say you created that experience. But I didn't. I kept extra locks on the doors, I told my doorman. Do you take responsibility for buying the stereo system? Yes. Do you take responsibility for buying the TV and the expensive clothes? Sure, but I didn't steal them. Do you take responsibility for renting the apartment you're in? Yes. Do you take responsibility for taking a job which leaves the apartment vacant all day? So what? Do you? Yes. Do you take responsibility for not having created friends who might have stayed in the apartment most of the time? Maybe, but whose idea is it that because you come home and find things missing from your apartment that you were robbed? My idea. Precisely. Damn it, says Barbara irritably. Precisely what? Precisely you created the idea that you were robbed. But I didn't cause the robbery. There was no robbery unless you created it. If your stereo was stolen, you did it. You're out of your mind. That's what A is all about, says Michael nonchalantly, and then he takes a step towards Barbara and shouts. Get out of your mind, Barbara. You're thinking in cliches and letting other people dictate reality when you actually create it yourself. Don't shout, she responds nervously. I shout when I shout, Barbara, and when I don't shout, I don't shout, he replies quietly. You created the robbery. Seems absurd, doesn't it? Yes. Barbara robbed her own apartment. Seems absurd, doesn't it, assholes? Nervous laughter, a few yeses. Someone shouts, damn absurd. Fine, says Michael, and then he continues in a low, serious voice. Once upon a time there was an old Zen master named Nanoko who lived alone in a hut in the woods. One night while Nanoko was sitting in meditation, a powerful stranger came to the door and, brandishing a sword, asked Nanoko for all his money. Nanoko continued to count his breaths while saying to the stranger, all my money is on the shelf behind the books. Take all you need but leave me 10 yen. I need to pay my taxes this week. The stranger went to the shelf and removed all the money except 10 yen. He also took a lovely urn on the shelf. Be careful how you carry that urn, said Nanoko. It can easily crack. The stranger looked once more around the small barren room and began to leave. You have forgotten to say thank you, said Nanoko. The stranger said thank you and left. The next day the whole village was in an uproar. Half a dozen people claimed they'd been robbed. When a friend noted that Nanoko's urn was missing, he asked Nanoko if he too had been a victim of the thief. Oh no, said Nanoko. I loaned the urn to a stranger, along with some money. He said thank you and left. He was pleasant enough but careless with his sword. Silence. Nanoko chose not to have his apartment robbed, the trainer comments after a while. Silence. The Sufis tell a different story on the same subject. He goes on quietly. A rich Muslim went to the mosque after a party and of course had to remove his very expensive boots and leave them with the hundreds of other pairs of footwear outside the mosque. When he emerged later after prayer, the expensive boots were gone. How could I be so thoughtless, he said to a friend. By foolishly wearing such expensive boots to the mosque I have been the occasion of some poor man's taking them and believing that he's stealing. I would gladly have given them but instead I am responsible for creating a thief. Silence. Someone coughs. Silence. Who robbed your apartment, Barbara? Michael asks. Silence. I didn't leave my stereo outside a mosque, she finally says. Laughter. No, you didn't. Silence. But I see what you mean. What do I mean, Barbara? Barbara frowns in serious concentration. I bought some expensive things, she says slowly. One day, the expensive things disappeared. And that's all. Thank you, Michael, she concludes, and sits. Long applause. You people may wonder later on why, when A graduates applaud a trainer or seminar leader, he or she applauds back. But it's simple. The trainer knows that you and you alone create the trainer in your universe, and if you then come to like him and admire him, he's your creation and you deserve the credit. But so, too, assholes, if you experience me as an arrogant fascist bastard, laughter, guess who created me? Yeah. Laughter and applause. You are each the sole source of your own experience, and thus totally responsible for everything you experience. When you get that, you're going to have to give up 90% of the bullshit that's running your lives. Yes, Hank? Look, says burly Hank, looking quite irritated, I get that I'm responsible for everything I do. I see that. But when I get mugged, there's no way I'm gonna accept responsibility for getting mugged. Who's the source of your experience, Hank? In this case, it would be the mugger. The mugger would take over your mind? My mind and my wallet. Laughter. Do you take responsibility for getting out of bed that morning? Sure. For being on that street? Yes. For seeing a man with a gun in his hand? For seeing him? Yes, seeing the mugger. Take responsibility for seeing him? Yes. Well, says Hank, I would certainly see him. If you had at that moment no eyes, no ears, nose, or sensations in the skin, you wouldn't experience this mugger, would you? My wallet would. But with no senses you would never know whether your wallet was missing or not. Do you get that you are responsible for seeing a man with a real gun asking for your money? Okay, I get that. That you are responsible for being at that street at that hour with money that might be stolen? Okay, I get that. That you chose not to risk your life by resisting this man and that you chose to give up your wallet? When a guy says give me your money with a gun in his hand, there's no choice. Did you choose to be at that place at that time? Yeah, but I didn't choose to have that guy show up. You saw him, didn't you? Sure. You take responsibility for seeing him, don't you? For seeing him, yeah. Then get it, everything that you experience doesn't exist unless you experience it. That mugger's still alive. That day walking beside you is a being from Mars. The being from Mars has ears which hear only ultrasonic sound, eyes which react only to light emissions of very high frequencies, and no other senses. After you've been mugged he would probably turn to you and say, I say, did you notice the groovy radiation that blob was emitting? Laughter. Everything a living creature experiences is created uniquely by that living creature who is the sole source of that experience. But somebody would be out there. One theory is that stimuli are out there, says Michael amiably. Billions every millisecond. But how you experience them is your contribution to the universe. But I didn't choose to be mugged. Nobody chose for you. You and you alone have created the way you experience things. Huh. Did you choose, seeing the man approach, to lend him $100? No. Wake up, Hank. I don't get it. There would be 8 million people in New York City that day. Maybe 20 would be mugged. The others, all 7,999,980 of them, would manage to avoid it. You managed to get mugged. Huh. Thank you. Applause. Fred, take the mic. Okay. So I see where we create our experience. Big deal. Cats create their experience. Dogs create theirs. Right? Right, Fred. My wife gets cancer. I experience her getting cancer. That makes me responsible? Right, Fred. That's bullshit. How the hell am I responsible for my wife's getting cancer? You're responsible for creating the experience of your wife's manifesting behavior, which you choose to call, by agreement with others, a disease called cancer. But I didn't cause the cancer. Look, Fred, I get that what I'm saying is hard for you to fit into your belief system. You've worked hard for 40 years to create your belief system, and though I get that right now you're being as open-minded as you can be, for 40 years you've believed that things happen out there and that you, passive, innocent bystander, keep getting run over by cars, buses, stock market crashes, neurotic friends, and cancer. I get that. Everyone in this room has lived with that same belief system. Me, innocent, reality out there, guilty. But that belief system doesn't work. It's one reason why your life doesn't work. The reality that counts is your experience, and you are the sole creator of your experience. Marsha? Thank you, Fred. Applause, inaudible voice. Take the mic, Marsha. I'm sorry, but I think you're just playing with words. The way words are normally used. That man's wife got cancer. Her cancer was caused by something, but it certainly wasn't Fred. I acknowledge that. And most people would find it meaningless to say Fred created his wife's cancer. I get that. It's true that certain physical changes take place in the wife which we know Fred didn't create and which are nowadays labeled cancer. But do you get that Fred's experience of her cancer, Fred's reality, may be incredibly different from someone else's? A few individuals seem able to die of cancer joyfully, that's right, to experience cancer joyfully, while most of us don't. And if you, Marsha, experience Fred's wife's cancer as a depressing, horrible thing, you ought to know that it's you who create it that way. It's you who create the particular case of cancer which you experience. Silence. Wow, says Marsha finally. I'm beginning to see what you're driving at. Certain Indian tribes see a man who goes around singing to himself and announcing he talks to God and accept him as a holy man and let him roam free. We label him a schizophrenic and lock him up. We create that man a schizophrenic. The Iroquois Indians create him a holy man. Somebody else might create him the Messiah. Whatever it is an individual creates in his experience he is responsible for. I'm beginning to get it, says Marsha. But aren't there some things, space, time, atoms, say, the differences between a man and woman, which are real, for everybody? Sure, they're real all right, but labels and the experience of those realities will always be different. You can't name one aspect of space or time or one difference between man and woman that people would experience the same, even just the people in this room. Well, I could, but I'd be too embarrassed to say it. Laughter. Say it. Well, a man has a penis and a woman doesn't. Do you all agree to that? 3 or 4 audible no's. Next. Wow, says Marsha. They must have seen some men I haven't seen. Laughter. You're damn right they have. Every fucking man they've seen is totally different from every man you've seen. Silence. I get that now, says Marsha slowly. Still, you are on the platform and I am not. Everyone here agrees with that. Oh yeah? Says Michael. Does everyone agree that I'm on the platform? Several trainees shout no vigorously. Where am I, Marsha? The trainer asks, taking a single step towards her and staring intently. Still on the platform, she says, frowning. Where am I, Marsha? He asks again. Marsha stares back at him, confused. She glances quickly off to her right for a moment as if for help. You're up there on the platform. Look at your experience, Marsha, says the trainer. Am I there? Yes, well, the way I see it anyway, you're on the platform. Ah, says Michael, the way you see it. Uh-huh. Where am I, Marsha? She stares at him. In my experience? Yes. And if I'm in your experience, who created me? I did. Shame on you. Laughter. Yes. You create me. You create me every second you choose to create me in your experience. Do you now, Marsha, accept responsibility for choosing to create me and let me be on this platform and let you be here in the room, not on the platform? Yes, I do. Do you accept responsibility for creating Fred's wife's cancer? Silence. Yes, I do. Thank you. Applause. David. You're still playing with words, says David firmly. Marcia may accept responsibility, but I bet she's not going to pay the hospital bills. I get that. So there's a difference between accepting responsibility for creating anger in oneself or anxiety, that I understand and agree is important, and this other thing of creating soldiers in Vietnam or cancer in somebody's wife. You're right, David, there is. Silence. So they're not the same, says David, surprised at the agreement. They're not the same, David. Anxiety is anxiety and somebody else's cancer is somebody else's cancer. For some people, somebody else's cancer is more frightening than their own anxiety. For you, your anxiety is important and Fred's wife's cancer isn't. I get that. I get that some of the things you create as extremely important to you and others you create to seem trivial or irrelevant. All I'm saying, you shouldn't believe me of course, is that you create them all. I'll think about it, says David, frowning as he sits. Applause. Robbie? You can't have it both ways, Michael, says Robbie, a young black man. On the one hand you keep telling us not to believe what you're saying, but on the other you're stating very loudly and authoritatively a lot of ideas which if we agree with we have to believe. No, you don't have to believe them. You don't have to agree with them. All I ask you to do is examine your experience and see if you don't experience the workability of certain points of view Werner has developed. If you can't experience your reality with these notions, just believing them is no improvement over whatever set of beliefs you have now. Beliefs don't work. But, look, says Robbie. I work in this electronics firm in Queens and I got a boss who's a 100% nut. He doesn't appreciate anything anyone does. Now how am I responsible for him? You think you've got a lousy boss? I know I've got a lousy boss, says Robbie, smiling. How many of you other turkeys are stuck with lousy bosses? Asks Michael. At least 50 or 60 hands seem to be raised, and nervous laughter flows across the room. Michael simply stands and shakes his head slowly. You want to know why things don't work out there? He asks suddenly. Because you don't want them to work out there. If things worked in your office then your boss would get the credit, and you know your boss is an asshole and doesn't deserve any credit. You're damned if you're going to do a good job in an unjust world. No, sir. You know, you people are crazy. Your boss isn't doing any good work because he knows his boss doesn't deserve it, and you're goofing off because of your boss, and that asshole of a secretary of yours. I wonder why she doesn't work harder? If the job isn't getting done, take the responsibility to see that IT does get done. I don't care who gets the credit, you're going to benefit from doing good work no matter who gets the external credit. And if you begin to take responsibility for creating your bastard boss, bingo. You're going to find your boss changing. Let me tell you a story. I once worked in the public relations office of Burroughs Corporation, and my boss never smiled, never gave me the slightest encouragement, and for about a year I'd given up and was doing as little as I could and still hold my job. Then I took the training and I thought the idea that I created my shit-ass boss was ridiculous. Still, after about a month I decided, just for a lark, a game it was, to pretend that I could make the whole office work. That it wasn't Burroughs Corporation, it was my corporation, Reed Corporation. So I worked hard. When someone wasn't doing his job, I did it, and often in a way that I didn't think anyone would realize that I was doing it. I was sort of a saboteur who in the dead of night fixed machines instead of wrecking them. You know, within 3 months, both my boss and my secretary seemed to be working twice as hard as I'd ever seen them work before, and my boss and I were having martinis together at lunch 3 or 4 times a week. He still didn't praise me, didn't smile much, but boy, did we get things done. But my working harder, says Robbie, after a long hesitation, isn't going to make my boss any less of a nut. Maybe not, says Michael, but it'll make you less of a nut. You'll end up getting more cheese, and that's what it's all about. Oh yeah, I can dig that. Yeah, I get that. But are you telling us we all gotta work harder even if we don't like the system we're working in? There's nothing you have to do. We're simply trying to answer the question, who's responsible for you doing a good job? Is it your boss? No. Who is it? Me. Fine. All I want you to see, to experience, is that you experience your boss as a nut who doesn't appreciate anyone and you are responsible for your work on the job. Don't blame nutty or corrupt or lazy bosses because you choose to do a lousy job. Wake up out there. You are causing the matter and don't you forget it. The question of who did it has been answered. The truth makes some people free, but, as Michael hinted, it makes others pissed off. The remainder of this third day of the training, and only half the day has passed, consists of 4 long processes, all intensely interesting to experience, and the first coming as a welcome break from the heaviness of dealing with one's own responsibility for the universe. In it, the trainer offers the opportunity for all the trainees to make asses of themselves. The process consists of the trainees acting out a series of brief ridiculous roles, each of which requires shouting and gesturing strongly, often in ways contrary to our self-imposed, socially accepted roles. It seems somewhat paradoxical that, having just learned to take full responsibility for our lives, our first act should be to create ourselves as fools. For some, it is a marvelous chance to let go. For others it is more difficult than was the danger process, for we are being asked to abandon our acts, our dignity, our seriousness. In the second long process we stack all our chairs against the walls, and spread out throughout the room on the floor. Eyes closed, we are guided in creating for ourselves a center, a safe space anywhere in the world where we can retreat and simply be with ourselves. Each of us is asked to find a favorite spot, in the woods, by the sea, on a mountain, where we would like to create our one-room center. We actually act out for ourselves and pantomime the building of the structure with our hands, using materials of our own choosing, so that its walls, windows, doors, and furnishings will be real for us. The trainer instructs us to construct inside the center a desk and 2 chairs, a magic wish button, a television screen, a digital clock that permits us to view any event at any time in the past, a stage where we can bring people to life, an abilities cabinet where we can hang the suits which, when donned, give us mastery of any ability we would like to have, and other items that will permit us to get in touch with aspects of ourselves perhaps rarely contacted and to re-experience past experiences. Our center becomes for the remainder of the training a useful space for the trainees to begin to experience the creation of their own experience. This night the trainees are asked to bring into our center 2 people, 1 male and 1 female, whom we wish to be in close touch with, and to create each person from head to foot with our hands as a sculptor might. After the naked body is created, then it is to be clothed and finally to be brought to real life and talked to and escorted to a seat in our center. When the process is over, there is the long-awaited break for a very late dinner. Under the chairs as the trainees return are little bundles of fruit, a cherry tomato, a lemon wedge, and a strawberry. There is also a smooth black stone, a small block of wood, a cube of metal, and a daisy. Toys. The atmosphere becomes lighter. There are small smiles and giggles here and there. For a while, bearing the awesome pressure of a harangue, or reacting to someone else's tragic life story, or having to handle one's own mistakes in life can be put aside. In spite of the nice discovery of the innocuous things under the chair, the threat exists that even this is going to be made into one of those emotional probes under one's armored hide. Inevitably, the instructions come, precise, thorough, one at a time. The trainees are instructed to pick up 1 item at a time, smell it, lick it, rub it against our faces, check its temperature, texture, form, size, color, weight. Observe how it reflects light, how many seeds are there, taste it outside, finally inside. Its multiple qualities and distinctions are carefully pointed out and experienced. Notice the daisy has a round center that consists of 100 tiny stamen, and it has an eye in the very center. Take it apart and examine one of the stamen. See how the leaves of the daisy are jagged and pointed. What do you see on the leaves? Finally we get to the delicious strawberry and notice the many hard little seeds, how the inside tastes different from the outside, how its color inside varies from outside. Notice how rough it is against your skin. This event is delightful. Most trainees are following exact instructions. A few go just so far and then eat the fruit without waiting any longer. It tastes especially good after so many injunctions against eating in the room. Later, a final process develops out of this attention to the properties of these objects. Spread out on the floor of the ballroom, we go into our space, eyes closed, and create our center. One by one we imagine and get inside each of the 7 objects, culminating in our creating an immense strawberry, its heavy top side down, which we begin climbing. This seems a little precarious, for the strawberry is 30 feet high, but the trainees are told they can use mountain climbing equipment and begin digging in for good footholds. Once at the top, we cut open a hole and climb down inside the open passageway that runs through the center of most of the length of the strawberry. Down we go into the pulp, eventually eating our way out the side near the bottom. Our last creation of the night is to climb our 60-foot-high daisy and, after spending 10 minutes using the petals and core as a trampoline, slide down the length of the stem to the floor. When the trainer brings us eventually out of our centers and out of our created worlds into the one we create of him in the hotel room, we all feel very good, either high or relaxed. And our good spirits aren't even dampened when Michael reminds us that tomorrow is the big day, tomorrow is the anatomy of the mind, tomorrow we will get it. Having just spent a lovely sensuous hour living inside a stone, a tomato, a strawberry, and other unusual domiciles, getting it seems strangely unimportant, until tomorrow.